I've asked people who have seen the book how they read it. As an author, I'm always interested in that. And in 90% of the cases, they say, well, I went to my section first and read that. I said, okay, that makes sense. Where'd you go after that? Well, I never really got to the rest of it. So obviously, their years were the golden years. So I kind of understand that. So this is kind of the whole arc of the history of the station. Some key dates. Marconi, for history buffs, demonstrated the feasibility of long-distance radio in 1901, and shortly after that, Dartmouth was already experimenting with radio. They had a code receiver in 1908. They had the first code transmitter in 1914. So even before World War I, Dartmouth was poking around with radio and eventually established a radio club around the World War I era. In the 1920s, that radio club got a license for an AM broadcast station, which was pretty easy to do then. And many colleges did that, as a matter of fact, and ran a AM station. It was intermittent. It covered football games. It had some plays, things like that they broadcast. And it collapsed spectacularly in 1925, and you can read all about that in my book. At that point, Ernest Martin Hopkins, the president, was really soured on radio, so he wouldn't allow any talk of a revival of the station. In 1941, though, some students, they tried in the 30s and they couldn't get it past him. In 1941, he finally approved the launch of a campus-limited DBS, Dartmouth Broadcasting System, which for its first year had a kind of a flaky system with little bitty transmitters in each dorm, but soon became a carrier current station, meaning the signal was through the electrical system of the college. A lot of colleges did that then. So from 1941 right up until the 50s, that's how Dartmouth had radio. And most colleges that started that early had radio, as a matter of fact. And that's the 75th anniversary that we're celebrating this year of the launch of student radio in 1941. It was a gap during the war, the late war years, where it had to go off the air. There's hardly anybody at Dartmouth then. Came back in 46, and it's been on ever since. In 1958, the station, as many of you know, launched, and some of you were involved in this, launched an AM station to replace this carrier current station, WDCR, which was pretty unique, actually. Most colleges had gone to FM, sometimes low-power FM. Dartmouth got a full-power AM license, which was the major type of station in those days, and commercial, and the students were given free rein to run the whole thing. It was called, we had a complicated thing that everybody had to learn, called the only completely student-run commercial AM station in the country. But as far as I can tell, that is true. Everybody else had some modification or oversight by professors or whatever. That was 1958. In 1976, the college added an FM station, WFRD, which again, some of you were involved in. So it was a duopoly at that point, 2 stations. Another important date that's probably not as well recognized is 1985. The AM station had been the dominant station, top 40 station, commercial station, very powerful in the market as a sales medium. And the FM had initially been the experimental station for students to try things out. But FM was on the ascendancy and AM was dying in the radio world. And so they flipped the formats in 1985. And FM became the lead station, the commercial station, and AM became the place where students, kind of more eclectic student station. This was unfortunately done in a kind of a top-down announcement, this is what you're going to do way, which stirred a great deal of strife at the station, which again you can read about. But the station survived it and became, within a year or two, the 99 Rock that we recognize today. The music mix has changed over the years, obviously, but it's been a tightly formatted FM rock station basically since then. Abdish can talk about that on the panel later. Wait a minute, I need this one. In the 2000s is probably the most troubled era, I would say, for Dartmouth Radio. Because of declining student interest, basically. This was the digital revolution, this was the streaming, this was downloading, this was iPods and digital music, and students just weren't volunteering to run a station anymore. They thought radio was dead, it wasn't part of their world anymore. Some of you remember in the 60s and 70s, they were practically beating down the doors to get a shift and to get on the station. Well, that's not true today, and it was not true in the early 2000s. That's when that hit. Also, there was a major change in competition. Heath Cole, the manager of the station, is Heath here? Okay, well, okay. He was going to try to get over some of this. He might come in later. Anyway, there are over 40 stations in the market today, 40. Some of us remember 2.5. You know, us, TSL, and whatever that thing was in White River Junction. But now there are 40, and at least 20 of those are real competitors too. So it's a much, and they're owned by huge national conglomerates, many of them. So it's a much more competitive environment today. There was also something called the JSA, the Joint Sales Agreement, which was, again, imposed top-down, unfortunately, in 2001. And this took all sales responsibility, all remaining sales responsibility away from the station and contracted it out to Vox Broadcasting. Yes?
Tim, when you say top-down, do you mean the station management, or do you mean the overseers, or do you mean the college?
Overseers, acting on behalf of the college.
And that's true also for switching AM and FM?
That was more the directorate, excluding the students who were running the station, the staff. The JSA was more the overseers telling the students, this is what you're going to do. The station manager was part of that overseers group, but there was no buy-in from the rest of the staff. And interestingly, some of these big decisions, like the shift of formats, the objections, there were directorate members who quit. I mean, people who walked out, wrote fire letters to the Dartmouth about this. Was not because of the shift, it was because of the way it was done. Because it was their station, they put all this work into it, and then somebody tells you, nope, you're going to do that, you know, and that didn't sit very well with unpaid volunteers. Again, there's much more detail in the book about that, but and again, maybe others have different opinions who were there at the time, but the people I've talked to, that's the story I get. The JSA, the Joint Sales Agreement, shifting, not only took all the sales responsibilities, what remained of them, away from the students, also took the one personal continuity, which was Winnie. Some of you remember Mrs. Hutchins, who was the secretary all through the 60s and 70s. She was succeeded by Winnie Lacoste, who was the Mrs. Hutchins of the 80s and 90s, and she was there all the time. She answered the phones. Everybody knew her. That position was eliminated, so there was nobody on site who was there continuously, who was kind of the go-to person at the station. So it really kind of ate away at the fabric of student autonomy, unfortunately. And the station between, I think it's fair to say, between 2000 and 2005, on-air product really deteriorated. There were spots didn't air, the station didn't get on the air in the morning, appointments were made to go see a sponsor, and then nobody would show up, and it was terrible. And it was impacting the saleability of the station considerably. During that period, they had to really go to voice tracking, which is pre-recording parts of shows so they could run on fewer people. So there's nobody at the station, and the computers are running the station, basically. Hired professionals to do some on-air shifts just to get them on the air, especially sports. In 2006, the Vox canceled. They said, we don't want any more of this. The students are so unreliable. So they dropped the JSA. So the sales responsibility came back. And at that point, the current manager of the station, Heath Cole, was hired to be the salesperson. And he's done a great job. I don't know if he's here or not, but he's very popular with the students. He involves them as much as he can in the operation of the station, and got, more importantly, the station back on track. He got the air product to be a saleable, reliable air product again, which it is today. And the ratings showed that, and the audiences, the advertisers came back, and the station really kind of came back together again in the period since 2006. It's a different station than the one some of you may remember from the 60s and the 70s, but radio is different today. 2008, one more date, that's the date that DCR AM went off the air. It sort of stayed off and on for a while after that, but basically 8 was when they shut it down and decided AM was not viable anymore. There just wasn't listenership to AM in the Upper Valley, not only with students, but even the wider Upper Valley. And it's become a web station since then, Web DCR. It still uses the WDCR call letters often. Even the 1340 shows up there in its logo now. And WFRD, the FM station, is streamed as well. So both of them are on the internet, can be heard on your smartphones or around the world. But FRD, FM is the lead station. It's a very successful station in the market, and WebDCR is the student sort of experimental side. Okay, what about the programming? Because I don't want to spend too much time on this. There has been, over the years, and many of you remember this, an extremely active news department, particularly from the late 50s, I would say, to the 90s. And there still is an active news department. But during those years, before a lot of the reporting mechanisms we have now, which Bob Hager will probably talk about, this was the home of the New Hampshire primary. This is where the first in the nation primary results were coming out. And the station was all over that. It mounted these huge election night broadcasts on the night of the New Hampshire primary, also on the general election often in November. Had people out all over the state at polling places and at the campaign headquarters calling in. And you can see a picture, a snapshot there of part of one of the big auditoriums in which these things were staged. During the 70s and early 80s, this coverage was syndicated to other stations, up to 30 stations up and down the East Coast, and the Voice of America carried it. Dartmouth newsmen reporting these results as they were coming in were heard by millions of people across the eastern United States and even internationally. WBZ in Boston carried it. I mean, major 50,000 waters carried this coverage and carried the name of Dartmouth out there. And Dartmouth radio news out there to a very, very wide audience. One of the highlights of station coverage over the years. There's been sports coverage virtually since the beginning of the station for obvious reasons, the teams we've had. There have been many, many interviews with visiting authors and composers and scholars, people like that, many of which were taped, and still we have those around our archives. And what I would call periodic waves of student creativity. And what I mean by that is, as I went through the history, I realized that every decade, well, every few years, there would be a group of students who would come in, who were very creative, like to write, like to produce, and they would use the station as a platform for their creativity, basically. And they would produce these shows, some of which I'd never heard of before, because they weren't my era. My era was the golden era, of course, but I hadn't, this was their golden era. So in the 40s, there was the DBS Workshop, which produced plays, often in conjunction with the Dartmouth Players, some very good plays, too. Original plays on radio in the 50s, something called the Hunky Dory Hour, which was a couple of graduates, a couple of seniors who were very good banter guys, and they had this kind of comedy show, of which I found a couple of tapes, and they're really funny guys. They graduated, and there's a gap for a few years, and then some more people come in. So it's not continuous, but every few years, there's people that come in and could do this. In the 60s, an example is Tales for the Midnight Hour. That some of you may remember that from the 60s. Paul Jones was 65, I think, produced it and had a small cast. And it started out as a horror show, but it turned into a horror comedy show, kind of an O. Henry kind of thing. And it's hilarious. It's network quality television. It's very, very good and tight. And we all thought they'll go on and become pros in this. Well, they didn't. They went off and did other things. But that was their moment of creativity, and the show was so good that it was rerun for years after they left, actually. And there was a noon hour, which was the place for politics and arts interviews, which did many, many very notable interviews in the late 60s and early 70s. In the mid-'70s, it was Midnight Mulch, which was kind of a comedy collective of this group that had no official leader, but they got together and they brainstormed ideas and they had running characters, and it was very '70s. It was very improv kind of stuff, but it was good. And so forth through the years. So you would have these things, and although the librarians and academics say, well, give me Robert Frost or give me somebody important who came, this is important too. This is student creativity at its best in some cases, and this, I think, needs to be preserved. A lot of it was not preserved by the stations, but was preserved by the people, the students who did it. So I found Tales for the Midnight Hour, 30 episodes in the hands of one of the guys who had been a principal actor on that show. He kept the tapes. So now they're around. I got digital copies made. So that's part of the station's heritage in what it produced over the years. Here are some of the individual shows. I won't go through all of these. There's too much time. I won't have time for the discussion here. Just point out a couple of them. You'll remember some of these names. We can talk about them. Student Fraternity Quiz, which eventually became Interfraternity Quiz, was hosted at one point by Buck Henry, who was one of our lesser known but more illustrious graduates from the radio station. Became a major Hollywood producer and creator of The Graduate and Get Smart and shows like that. 1955 was when Robin Robinson. How many here don't remember Robin Robinson? 2. Okay, that's fair. That's fair. He's dead now. Rob. He was a math professor, I believe, who loved classical music and put on a classical music commentary show for almost 50 years. Started on the station in '55, it lasted until he died in 2002. So there's longevity for you. And what's happening, I found that interesting. 1969, some of you from the '70s may remember that. Charlie, you probably remember that show. That's when Dartmouth was beginning to admit African Americans and seek them and try to diversify the student body more. And that was started by a class of '70 named Wally Ford as a late night show. Is that Wally? Well, if I say anything wrong, feel free to correct me. I'm going to try to get this right. But I wanted to recognize what you started, Wally, because that morphed into a show called Black Side. It was more than 10 years, long after you graduated, was the place on radio in the Upper Valley, not just the station, that presented a side of music and culture that hadn't been in this market before. Soul music and R&B music and so forth. So it's, again, it lasted until the '80s, and it was I think an important contribution to the station to diversity in another sense, in a radio sense up here. In the '90s, there were more. The Rocktober promotions began then. Probably the most successful promotion outside the station that the station ever staged in 1998 was Rockfest, which was, anybody here ever heard of Rockfest or know it? You might know it from my book. Yeah. Were you there, or did you just heard of it?
There are a lot of posters in the station for it.
It was a concert staged in North Haverhill, quite a ways north, where they could get a big venue. 6 bands, including the Goo Goo Dolls, who were just hotter than hot right at that point, made $70,000 for the station. It was an all branded, WFRD 99 Rock, a big outdoor rock concert staged by the students and staged by the station management. The station could do that. And more recently, there have been things like Valley Voices, which is a public affairs, very important public affairs show that captures a lot of important people as they come through Hanover. And the Big Green Scene, which is the sports commentary show, which has won awards. So it continues to this day with very important programs, and we can talk about some of these in the discussion. Where are they today? Rauner, which is not far from here, is a very modern and research library which holds boxes and boxes of tapes of DBS and DCR and FRD broadcasts that have been deposited there, plus a few that I've scraped up from alumni. And any of you who have other shows that maybe you have and others don't, I encourage you to make copies for them. Most of them are on cassettes, remember cassettes? Or reel-to-reel tapes. Very few of them have been digitized for financial reasons, which is unfortunate because the tapes will deteriorate. Some are not even labeled what they are. So there's a lot there, but there's a lot that needs to be done to preserve it. It's really a important heritage of the station, which is waiting to be rediscovered, I think. Now, finally, I want to say something about a study that was part of the College Radio Days project. And that was research into what happened, who ran the station and what did they later become? What were their careers? How did the station prepare them or not for what they became? Because a lot of people you talk to, including faculty and outsiders, think of college radio, and I've been to national conferences on college radio. They think of college radio as a kind of a radio school, kind of a place to train people how to run a radio station, almost a trade school within a university setting. But that has not been the case at, certainly not at Dartmouth. It's much more than that. So I identified almost 700 what I call station leaders, people who had held any kind of position at the station, directorate or chief announcers and engineers, all kinds of people if they were part of the leadership cadre of the station. I traced more than 600 of them, I was able to, of what careers they went into after that first. Then I talked to about 200 of them, and so, including many of you that are here, in interviews or in email correspondence to find out more about what they had done as well as their station experiences. So what did I find? First of all, hardly any, or very few went into radio, maybe 10%. The vast majority, and some went into other kinds of media, like myself, I went into television, but the vast majority became educators, became financiers, became lawyers, lots of lawyers, of which we have some here. All entrepreneurs, starting businesses their own. A lot of the more recent classes have gone into the digital space and have started websites or started companies based around the internet and digital. But not radio. So I asked them, whenever I was interviewing somebody, I asked them, well, did this experience at a college campus radio station really have anything to do with what you're doing now? And I would say more than 90% said, oh yeah, definitely. So what was it? Well, they learned leadership skills, they learned how to run a business, they learned speaking skills, important to lawyers and others who have to present themselves. They learned a certain sense of entrepreneurship and how you do that in a real kind of crucible when you're 20 years old. Sales skills. We can talk more about this at the panel, but a lot of very applicable skills for later careers, whatever those careers happen to be. So the point I like to make in these presentations is it's a lot more than a radio school. And I got quotes from a lot of them. One of the best experiences of my life taught me how to ask the right questions. That's from Senator King, by the way, who we'll hear from tonight, who was a newsman at the station in the 60s. And he said, he went on to become a two-term governor, and he's a senator today. And he said, you got to ask the right questions. And when I was out there sticking a mic in the front of a local alderman or something like that, that's how I learned how to do that, what the real questions were. Which proved very important to me in my political career. Anyway, so, and others. Working at the station was, for me, the most outstanding activity of mine at Dartmouth. I owe my career to Dartmouth Broadcasting. So, very important in lots of ways. And we'll see, as we invite the panel up here, I'm going to ask each of them to spend 3 or 4 minutes talking about their experience at the station, and maybe a little bit about how that informed what they later became. We'll hear that from some actual members of the station, alumni. So that's my quick presentation. These are our panelists, except for Skylar, who unfortunately couldn't make it due to illness. Let's see. And the way this will work, as I say, I'll ask them each to speak briefly and go through the panel, and then we'll elaborate on some of the things that they talked about, and then we'll ask you to ask questions and/or your own experiences if you want to add them in, or maybe elaborate on something that you have heard in this. Now, they're not in order here because they didn't know what the order was, nor did I. But I will go in class order. Actually, sitting right next to me here is Robert Hager, class of '60, who is living in Woodstock, Vermont now. He was part of Dartmouth Broadcasting throughout his college days and was news and sports director for most of that time. Later, he worked for 35 years for NBC Television as a correspondent. Some of you, I'm sure, saw him on the air as one of their main correspondents nationally and internationally, out of bureaus in Vietnam, Berlin, Moscow, New York, and Washington. He retired 12 years ago, Robert Hager. Well, we'll hold the applause to the end if we can. Sitting next to him fortuitously is George Whitehead of Dover, New Hampshire. He was the chief studio engineer and general manager, then later general manager of WDCR from 60 to 61. Went on to work on the Apollo spacecraft program, later for Collins Radio and Digital Equipment Corporation. He's a consulting engineer for the New Hampshire Public Radio and has been one of the most active alumni in recent years, assisting Dartmouth Broadcasting here on campus and helping them, especially on technical matters. Alan Ryan, next, is after graduation, he spent a year at WDSU AM in New Orleans, then went to law school in Minnesota and moved to Washington, where he was, in sequence, a law clerk at the Supreme Court, U.S. Marine Corps officer, a war crimes prosecutor in the Department of Justice. He returned to Boston in 1985 and has been a lawyer at Harvard for the past 31 years. He's written 3 books on the law of war and war crimes, and is on the board of the Veterans Legal Services, which is a Boston nonprofit for homeless vets. Charlie Smith is next. According to my research, is the most successful student salesman in station history. Boy, if we had more like that, the station probably still would be student sold. He worked in radio in this area for a while after graduation, moved on to Microsoft in the year 2000, and he's now Enterprises Services Program Manager at Microsoft. And Abdish Bajvar, at the end, class of '87, is a physician. He is the head of a four-physician retina surgery practice, the Retina Center of Minnesota. He's published many articles, book art chapters, and surgical videos, including his textbook, Retina and Vitreous Surgery. While he was the FM program director at Dartmouth, he oversaw installation of the first CD player, reconstitution of the format from contemporary rock to AOR. That was as I described as the format was changing, as well as the rock redesign of the logo. And I give him credit, although he doesn't give credit for himself, as coming up with the term 99 Rock, which of course is its logo today. So those are our 5 panelists. I'm Tim Brooks. I went on to a long career at NBC and USA Network, other networks, as the head of research. So that's my career. And now I'd like to turn it over to Bob Hager as the first here to talk a few minutes about your experiences. Bob?
Okay, thank you very much, Tim. Hello, yeah, that works. I was interested in your, that long phrase, only completely student-run commercial AM station in the U.S. How we did it was, this is WDCR, Dartmouth College Radio, the best college radio station in the nation. That was our station break. So I had this pal, Wally Palmer, who was one of our announcers. So the name is important, Wally Palmer, because one day he's sitting in front of what he thought was a dead mic, and he says, "This is Polly Walmer, and this is the worst college station in the nation." And of course, it's right out on the air. So I think probably a lot of people could identify with this, as I kind of majored in college radio station when I was at Dartmouth. I was from Woodstock, so I'd been very involved in high school and coming over to see all the ball games and things like that. So I already felt like I was a Dartmouth student before I got here, but I was a history major, but my real major was the college radio station. I had known from the 5th grade on that I wanted to be in broadcasting. I had an earache that summer, spent a lot of time in bed, and I was listening to the radio just to entertain myself, listening to newscasts and sportscasts. I said, man, this is what I want to do for a living. So that really helped because in high school, as soon as I could get my driver's license, I drove around to all the little stations in Vermont and got a part-time job over in Rutland and kept that summers and school vacations through rest of high school and college. When I got to Dartmouth, couldn't wait to go up to WDCR and enroll right away. Well, it was WDBS then, but I did. And so I was at the station for all 4 years, loved it. I was news and sports director for a couple of those years. I did a daily newscast, which was very helpful for later on in life, but had to organize it all, and a lot of it was ripped off the wire, but I had to write the continuity between the items and so forth. So I learned a lot from that. But the real thing was, as sports director, I could do the play-by-play, and that was where the action was. I loved that. So I did all the football games for 3 years out of my 4 at college. Freshman year, I was still a trainee, so I wasn't allowed to. But freshman year, I did because they were doing the main team football and basketball, so to invent something for me to do, I talked them into doing ice hockey. They'd never done ice hockey before. So from the old Davis rink, I did ice hockey that first season. We won a lot of championships in those years. We got the Ivy football championship. 2 years in a row, it came down to the last game at Princeton, and a lot of the alumni councils around the country piped in the broadcast from DCR. So that was a real thrill. And the first year we lost that final game. Second year we won the Ivy Championship, and we did a post-game show from the locker room at Palmer Stadium in Princeton. It was great fun. And basketball, we got 2 Ivy Championships that year, and so that meant we went on to the NCAA tournament. So that was a thrill of a lifetime. Twice. The first round was at Madison Square Garden. I got to broadcast from Madison Square Garden. And the first of those 2 years, we won at Madison Square Garden, so then went on to the Sweet 16, and the regional playoff was in Charlotte, North Carolina. So we went down there and did 2 broadcasts. We won the first night and went on to the next night, the final 8, and lost there. But we got to do 2 broadcasts from Charlotte, North Carolina. So as I say, it was just great fun. We did crazy things. I remember Tuck School. In the little circular drive that still exists there in the spring, they would do this really nutty bicycle race. It's like line skating in the Olympics, knocking each other all over the place. And there were, in those days, lots of mint juleps flying around in the early morning, and we had them too. And we went down there and broadcast the whole morning from there. Had a bacchanalian good time. I lived through that transition from we used to kid about it coming over the radiator, which was about the way they got the signal when it was closed circuit. But it was my junior year that we went over the air, and I had done quite a bit of work at WTSL in high school and kept that through college. So I knew all the people over there. I had a foot in each camp, and they were scared to death and fought it bitterly. I always thought it probably wouldn't damage them too much when Dartmouth got their AM license, and in the end, I don't think it did. But it was interesting with a foot in both camp living through it. I spent just a lot of time on the radio station. As I say, my roommate was pre-med and went on to a career as a doctor, and he was a really good student, regular fellow, really big booker though, and he to this day remains a good friend, lives up here in Lyme. And he always kids when he tells people about, geez, we were roommates. And he said, I'm studying my chemistry and my math, and Hager's over there working on his depth charts for Saturday's game and all that crazy stuff. And, we're over there at that radio station. He said, what kind of a nut is this? But my defense is, well, it worked out. I mean, it worked out for me. I have one final story about one of my most embarrassing incidents at the station. It's my sophomore year, and we're going down to Warwick, Rhode Island for a basketball game, University of Rhode Island. And I got down there and we got all hooked up and opened up my book for the broadcast, and I've left the commercials back in Hanover. I don't have any commercials. I knew that it was sponsored by the Dartmouth Co-op, which at that time sold ski equipment. They don't anymore. I mean, they sold the actual skis, so that was their big push. And I remembered that from on air, and I thought, well, I've worked at these little stations and worked at Dartmouth College. I can ad-lib my way through it. And I tried, all about, oh, this winter you'll have great fun, go where the champions buy their material and all that for the co-op, Dartmouth Co-op, and their wonderful Rossignol skis, and you'll love it. And so anyway, turns out they didn't sell Rossignol skis. Not only that, they sold head skis. Rossignol was scored by the only other ski shop in town, Art Bennett's ski shop across the street. So I had plugged their competition's product. The business office was not happy with me when I got back. Anyway, thanks very much for coming. Look forward to it.
Thank you. Thank you. George?
Well, I'm class of '61, so I entered in the fall of '57, and that means that I was present and instrumental in getting WDCR on the air for the first time in March of 1958. And later in 2009, I was instrumental in turning DCR off and decommissioning the station. So that, I suppose that's the unglorious part of that honor. But entering as a freshman, I had already been involved in the technical side of radio, having, as a ninth grader, gotten an amateur radio license and built some of my own equipment and stuff. So I knew about radio electronics. And some of you may remember from that era that as entering freshmen, we were required to wear our freshman beanies out in public, whenever we were out in public. And that meant we were subject to being indentured by upperclassmen and fraternities and so forth to move furniture into dormitories and do whatever they wanted. I was already aware of the Dartmouth radio station from the literature that I looked at from as an applicant, and so I think about the second day of the freshman week, I sought out where it was at the top of third floor Robinson and wandered up there, and two or three guys were ripping down walls and changing floor tiles and stuff in what became Studio 3X, which you're quite familiar with. That was in preparation for a DJ studio for the advent of on-air AM in several months. So I said, gee, I know a little bit about radio. Is there anything I can do to help? And I recall it was Al Cameron at the time, who later became general manager, and he looked at me and he said, what do you know about radio? I said, well, I have a general class amateur radio license and I built my own equipment. And he says, yeah, well, broadcast radio is a lot different from ham radio. And I thought for a second, I said, yeah, but the basic principles are the same. And he looked at me and said, hey, you're right, grab a hammer. So that was freshman week. I began my four-year career at Dartmouth College Radio, as we called it at the time, WDCR. And I was involved in the engineering staff actively. I worked with Bob on remotes as a studio and remote engineer on several occasions, and that was my gist. I spent the Christmas vacation of that freshman year studying for and getting an FCC first radio telephone operator's license, which was required by every radio station to have a person on board every day, taking meter readings and so forth, make sure the equipment was operating legally. No longer true, by the way. No licenses required these days. But so that's how I got involved, and I rose through the ranks of the engineering staff there, and then, to my surprise, I was asked to be general manager by the preceding directorate, Al Cameron's directorate, as a spring of 1960. So what I recall is, I always felt, as many have, and as Tim very specifically pointed out, that the value of working at the station had long-term career impact and personal impact. It was an opportunity to work in a multifunctional organization with 50 to 100 people with various and sometimes challenging personality types toward a common purpose, toward a common goal, and with a lot of enthusiasm and with a sense that there were some important people at the college that were depending on us to do the job right, the trustees, namely, and the president. I recall that when I became general manager, we got a call from DeGil Tanis, the President Dickey's executive assistant. Hey, I want you guys to come over and have a chat with the President Dickey, and we did. And he was just wanted to size us up as the new management of his radio station on behalf of the trustees, and we got feedback that it went quite well. It was a very informal chat, and so that kind of experience, as many of you will attest to, was very important in learning how to work in organizations with people in complex functional relationships and so forth going forward. To the end of the story, I got reconnected with Dartmouth Broadcasting in 2008 because I was up here for some reason I can't remember, and I wandered over to Robinson and wondered what they were going to be doing about the 50th anniversary. Actually, I think it was December of 2007. And basically, the answer was, well, I don't think we're doing anything. I said, that's terrible. So I kind of worked with them and encouraged them, and we got some help together, and we managed to put together, go through the picture files, of which there were a large number, and try to sort them out by decade and identify some people that I was aware of. So during the reunion period, where they had open house going on and several boards of pictures and welcomed alums to come by. I was a little bit disappointed that the scope of that anniversary was not greater, but at least we did something. And then as a result of that, I learned that the equipment was not operating very well at the station. They had no engineering staff anymore, and I said, well, I've got some engineering background. I'd be happy to try to help you fix it. So for a couple of years, I was up here just about every week, driving 2 hours from the other side of the state, working on repairs, and we did some new equipment upgrades, thanks to Paul Gammaccini, class of 70, donated some money, we put in a new digital board in production and so forth. And then came the time when shortly after I got involved, that it was evident that DCR needed somewhere in the order of $50,000, $60,000 worth of repairs to stay on air. It wasn't making any money. The coverage was down because of the poor condition of the antenna system and so forth. Decision was made in November of 2009 to finally turn it off, and I volunteered to be the one to kind of project manage the disposition of the equipment because the athletic department was hot on our case. They needed to build a women's softball field on Chase Field. Historically, they were always coveting that property. But that's certainly a worthy purpose, and the station had reached the end of its life cycle. So again, great experience, very valuable. Even though it compromised my academic success on many instances, I was able to recover enough to get through, even in an engineering curriculum, in fifth year at Thayer School, and the rest is history.
Thank you. Alan?
Thanks, Tim. It's interesting because I'm hearing very much the same sentiment and some of the same experiences that I had, particularly before I came here. I'd always been fascinated with radio. And I remember the first time I went, I saw at some car dealership or something, there was a remote broadcast, and I remember thinking, the guy sitting in the trailer is actually talking on the air. I mean, that's really radio right here. And my brother and I started a make-believe radio station, which meant that we were essentially talking to each other, but pretending that we were on the air. And then when I started looking at colleges and saw that Dartmouth had an AM radio station, the light bulb sort of went off, and I said, if I can manage to get myself in, then maybe I could actually work on a radio station. And so the first day of freshman week or whatever the period was, I went over to Robinson Hall and said I wanted to work on the radio station. And that was basically the beginning of it. There, I wanted to be on the air. That just, to me, that was radio. And I remember taking reading copy to try out as an announcer because I was told that not everybody could be an announcer. But so I sat down and I read the copy, and whoever was in charge, I thought it was Tim, but he tells me it probably wasn't him. said afterwards, well, your voice is okay, and you know, your articulation is good, but you've got to get rid of that Boston accent. And I said, what Boston accent? I'm here at Dartmouth. I don't have any Boston accent. Could have gone to Harvard, but I never applied, so I didn't go there. But I started on the air, and later in freshman year, in the rookie slot, which was 6 a.m. to 7 a.m., which we called the Farm Show, and it was later changed, fortunately, to Dawn Patrol, which sounded a little more macho, but it really wasn't. And so from 6 to 7, and really all of you have probably had the experience of waking up on a February morning in Hanover and walking across the green at 5:30 in the morning. If you haven't, don't start now, but it was really something. And we had no idea. It was called the Farm Show, so I ripped off the copy from the UPI ticker, and I read, like, the price of hogs in Kansas City that morning or something, figuring that was what farmers were interested in. But it was a good experience just to be there. My most memorable moment came on November 22nd of 1963, when I was on the air at 1:30 in the afternoon, when Gus King, now Senator Angus King, was getting ready to do the news at 2 o'clock. And I was sitting in Studio 3X there, the small DJ studio, and I heard the UPI ticker in the room adjacent ring 10 times. I thought, that's odd. I mean, usually when a bulletin comes across, it rings twice, or if it's really urgent, it rings 3 times. And a few minutes later, Gus came into the studio and he said, "Al, look at this." And I looked at it, and it said, 3 shots were fired near President Kennedy's motorcycle today, motorcade today in Dallas, Texas. And I'm sitting there saying, holy crap, what do I do now? And the answer was, first of all, get help. But before all of the grown-ups could come, that Tim Brooks and others, I said, well, this is news. And I turned on the mic and I read it. And I read it again, and I said, further developments will be broadcast as they come in. And over the next 20 minutes or so, until Tim and others arrived, there were further bulletins. The president has been wounded. The president has been taken into surgery. And I don't recall. I think it was actually later when they announced the death. But DCR went on full backs to the wall footing that day, because we were the news outlet for the Upper Valley. I mean, even television, at least for students, television was not a daily feature of our lives then here. And I don't know what the other stations were doing, but people tuned in and they listened, and we gave them the coverage, and we reported it, I think, as well as any news organization in the country at that time. At least, I shouldn't say news organization, but any radio station in the country. So that, I think, in my senior year, 65, 66, we began year-round operation, broadcasting through the summer. It was the first year that Dartmouth had a summer school, not the summer term that's part of the academic year now, but a freestanding, more or less, summer school. And it was the first time that women attended Dartmouth as students in this summer school. And I was there for the summer with Mark Blanchard and Bob Cohn and 3 or 4 others, and we were basically given the responsibility of keeping the station on the air, running it from 6 a.m. or 5 a.m. till 1 a.m. And we were also taking courses at the summer school. The trade-off being we got free room and board, and the courses we took in the summer school meant we could ease off during the academic year. But very soon after we started, 2 young women, students, came up to the 3rd floor of Robinson Hall and said, we'd like to work on the radio station this summer. And we said, well, okay, here, take this news copy and go sit down over there and read it in the microphone, and you better not have a Boston accent. And they did, and they were fine. They spent the summer with us. They read news. They DJ'd and did an absolutely terrific job. So I will I will put modesty aside and say that was the introduction of women on the staff of radio at Dartmouth, because they really were on the staff all summer, all summer long. And it was a terrific experience. Being in Hanover in the summertime was wonderful, and having essentially a full-time job at the station was a terrific experience. It was also the year that the Board of Overseers was instituted, and I do have to say that as far as we were concerned at the time, the Board of Overseers was a shield for us against some of the voices in the administration who thought we should be doing something different. And to illustrate why that is, why I thought that, there were eight of us on the Board of Overseers, and 5 of us were the student directorate of the station. So when you have a Board of Overseers that consists of a majority of those who are being overseen, it was a piece of cake. It was, I think, President Dickey, who was a big friend of Dartmouth Radio, and John Bryant at the time, the liaison to us. They were very helpful. They oversaw us with a very benign eye, and I think it was a great help. I will take final credit for one of the less brilliant ideas at Dartmouth. We decided in the spring of '65, I guess it was, that we would do some marketing and try to raise our profile around. And I came up with the brilliant idea of calling ourselves the Jolly Green Giant of the Upper Valley. And then I came up with the further brilliant idea after we launched that. About 2 days later, I wrote to the Del Monte company and asked if they wouldn't like to take part in this and support it, because it would be great for them. And I got back a letter from a very impressive law firm in New York. That's where I learned the meaning of cease and desist. But all of that, tangibly, it helped me get into law school, I'm sure, because it certainly wasn't my grades that got me in, particularly in my senior year. And it has been really, as many have said, the most formative experience I had at Dartmouth. And it's great to be back and to see others who know what that means.
Thank you. Charlie?
So I'm hearing some common threads here. In high school, I was on what we called the stage crew, doing technical theater, and the number 2 person on the stage crew became in charge of the school radio station, which was some speakers in the hallways with a couple of turntables and a converted closet. So when I got to Hanover, I went to activity night, and I went first to the Dartmouth Players, and they said, very interesting, we'll get back to you. I went to WDCR, and I never escaped. During my first year, I took all the trainings. I was a disc jockey, I was a newsman, I was a news producer, and I worked with the idea of selling. And because I had worked in retail in high school part-time, there was talk about sometime around early November, we'll go sell Christmas advertising. And I said, retailers have planned their Christmas campaigns in September, and many of them buy their media in October. Perhaps we should start earlier. And that turned out to be a good idea, and I was thought to be a precocious salesperson. And so I got involved in sales. I think that it's a little bit unfair to say that I was the most successful student seller, because we were able to, partly driven by the need to accumulate the funds for WFRD to get the college to agree to file the application, I had some powerful tools. As has been mentioned, there are lots of people who want to work on air. You want an air shift, you will service 3 accounts. So the sales department didn't have to every week meet with every customer and rewrite copy and so forth. We had an army of talent who would do that. And we had another event that was helpful, which was the 1972 primary, when George McGovern, every time they got a check, would send us a check. We would literally receive 3 checks a day with orders for political advertising. We did a lot of business that year. And it was after that election that the law mandate was changed to mandate lowest unit rate for political advertising. But thinking about what do you learn primarily in the performing and producing side, the first thing you learn is if you make a mistake, don't go to pieces, just continue and maybe people won't notice. Thinking on your feet, making decisions. And that was helpful to me in other things that I've done. I have an air transport rating. I did air charter and air ambulance for a little bit. Literally sometimes dealing with life and death as the general manager of an air ambulance, moving patients from hospital to hospital. I also got to do, because I did everything at the radio station, I wound up with my first job after Dartmouth being as general manager of WCNL down in Newport, which was the proverbial 250-watt daytimer. And our representative, Harold Siegel, had set that job up for me. I never interviewed. I was just told, show up next Tuesday and you'll meet the owner. And while I'm waiting to meet the owner, I read in that Monday's Broadcasting Magazine that the company that owned that station and 2 others was designated for hearing to see if it had the character to remain a licensee. So it was a very interesting first environment. And Bill Downell, who had been general manager on our directorate, wound up succeeding me when I left 4 months later as general manager. So probably the most memorable decision-making experience that I had at the station was on a February morning. I was in at my desk working on sales stuff, and typically on Saturday mornings in February, freshmen are the DJ and the news person, so the upperclassmen can sleep off their hangovers. And the newsman came down with, at the time we had both AP and UPI, with 2 tear-offs, and said, what do I do with this? This is an attack warning, emergency action notification. The President of the United States has determined the United States is under attack with an authenticator word. And I went upstairs with them. I said, let's see what the authenticator says. It was correctly authenticated. We also had an over-the-air monitor of WBZ, which we understood had a direct line to connected line to Washington, and I said, turn on the on-air monitor and see if WBZ is alerting, and they were not. So I made that management decision, being the senior person and one of 3 who were there. We're not going to go to the alert unless WBZ does. And I kick myself that I didn't grab those tear-offs and save them for posterity. So it's kind of the thinking on your feet thing. So when I'm just about to climb into a cloud after missing an approach to an airport that I shouldn't have been making an approach to, and all my electricals fail, I engaged in decision-making. And some of that goes back to the things we learned on air and and in engineering and so forth. So I wound up my first career being with several small radio stations. I did a brief period running an office for Harold Siegel in New York City and representing the Ivy Network. In all the small radio stations, I did everything plus the engineering. We kind of interpreted under the supervision of a first-class engineer very liberally of if I have his phone number and I know he'll answer if I call. I'm working under his supervision. Another thing that we enjoyed at Dartmouth in my time was we all had computer accounts, and we all learned BASIC. And I wrote a system for the station I was running in Maine on a small IBM computer, written pre-PC computer, written in BASIC, and I wound up taking the rights to that, arranging to get the rights to that from the radio company. Went into business selling a system to small radio stations. From that, there was kind of an interim period after IBM and I disagreed in court, and it would have been cheaper to go to law school. But I was represented by Al, who now calls himself Fred Frawley, who was the next year general manager, was my FCC attorney as a second month associate as an FCC law firm, and then had come back to Maine and represented me. But the computer thing, that's where I did the air charter and the air ambulance and horse racing. And then I had to make a living again, so I went into computers in body shop consulting, and then in through a series of events with Compaq and then with Microsoft, and I've enjoyed the last 16 years at Microsoft. The reason that it's kind of unfortunate that the students don't get to sell, there's something that's said at Microsoft that everybody sells. Maybe you don't hand over the contract and ask for the signature, but every day in life we're selling. We're selling ourselves, we're selling the product of whatever organization we're working with. We're using the tell me technique, whether it's consulting on a computer project or trying to get an order. And all of those were things that we learned in the selling process at Dartmouth Broadcasting.
Okay, thank you. I just have to interject. I think Charlie is modest in this. If there were certainly opportunities to be taken advantage of, as you say there, but you know how to take advantage of them and how to grab the moment. And I recommend, I hope I've represented it accurately in the book, but if you want to see how a student can pull a team together, can focus on an object, can realize it, can incentivize, can do all of the things that are just so important in harnessing a group of people toward a goal, read the section, even if it's not your golden years, read the section where he did that. It's really instructive. Abdish, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and thanks for organizing the program, and thanks for all of your work, Tim, in bringing everyone together from the history of radio and for bringing us together, for sure. I was a latecomer into Dartmouth Radio. I did not know anything about Dartmouth Radio as a freshman or as a sophomore. And I actually played in the Dartmouth College Marching Band as an alto saxophonist a freshman year, was very involved in that. Went on to my sophomore year, and I devoted a good amount of time to founding the first Indian Students Association at Dartmouth, called the Dartmouth Bharatiya Association. It subsequently has undergone many iterations and name changes, but is amazingly still alive today. The interesting part is that I don't take ownership in any of those activities. I took ownership at my activities at Dartmouth Radio, and that started well into my junior year. I was approached by our trainer at the time, Mark Greenstein. He trained most everybody in the mid to late 80s at Dartmouth Radio. He was doing, and they were doing, a remote broadcast right on the green during one of the summer programs, and that's when it hit me that that he wanted, not only had he been asking me for a number of years to participate, he was my freshman trip group leader, by the way. So he had asked me about Dartmouth Radio, but I really didn't register it until that time. That's when he said, let's just get you into the studio and start training. So I did, and it was the most wonderful experience that I could imagine. Dartmouth Radio was welcoming. From the minute I was asked to try it out, it was a very tight experience in terms of everyone's devotion to the mission that they were working on. It was, to say it was a family is maybe putting it more tritely than I'd like to put it, but it was something more than just another activity. We spent most of our time at the station, even our free time when we were not on the air. We spent an inordinate amount of time planning for things as the directorate, even at non-scheduled meetings. We spent an inordinate amount of time once I became FM program director, in terms of making decisions on what to do at the station, how to staff the station. After becoming a DJ on AM, I then was asked to become a DJ on FM, and then by chance was asked to serve as interim program director in the summer of '86 during my summer of junior year. And then was asked to be FM program director for the entire senior year, which was the most wonderful experience I've ever had. And I know today that I owe most of my experiences and success today to the experiences that I had in Dartmouth Radio. Learning how to manage a group of middle managers who get paid nothing, yet work, I thought, harder than I worked on organizing the music programming, getting our charting out to the companies, figuring out what our air product was really going to be in terms of rotations of songs and so on. That was really an outstanding experience. Learning how to make people or entice people or convince people to work for you without them really thinking they're working for you or working for the station. They're having fun. But it wasn't just fun. It was real work. And it was real work that drove a commercial air product. It was real work that drove a consistent air product. I was fortunate to have inherited some maybe forward-thinking people who really wanted to change the formatting of the station. And so that process began a few years before I started. And in '85, it really was, and even in '86, the station really was contemporary hit cross album-oriented rock station, which really wasn't a consistent air product. And so we were trying to compete with the big station across the way that was actually owned by our general manager's brother, Shapiro, and we had to compete with that station. They were clearly CHR, Contemporary Hit Radio, so we decided that we would be predominantly album-oriented rock, develop a consistent air product, and that's when that change occurred. And we were able to do it successfully. We had the pleasure and the fun of a few firsts. Sound at the speed of light was our consistent message before every CD that we played. We had a special jingle that went sound at the speed of light with a neat laser sound before every CD that we played. We got the CD player on a trade out. We got the CDs on trade out. Every week we'd go to the CD shop and get new CDs for the ads that we played. Our billing staff at that time did a wonderful job at organizing programs so that we could have trade out and we wouldn't have to pay for anything, which was very, very nice. What other things did we contribute during the station? Well, the teamwork that happened was just incredible. We built a new studio, a new back studio, the engineering studio. And I remember carrying up the big boards up the stairwell with just everybody in the station helping out. We had no professional help, of course, and we did everything on our own. But it was all done by students, every single bit of it, from the engineering, from the wiring, all done by students. The way that which each successive individual who was coming into the station was trained to splice tape, to do new tasks, to make promos on their own. It was all self-taught, just by word of mouth and by training one after the other. There was no professional oversight, no professional trainers. It was all student-run, student-trained, and that is really something to be proud of for the entire history of Dartmouth Radio. Very different. What did I come away with? From the mechanical sense, Dartmouth Radio taught me about voice. I knew some of that before from forensics in high school, but I really didn't know much about breathing. I didn't know much about being in front of a mic, avoiding popping in a mic training, cadence. I didn't really learn any of those things until it came to Dartmouth Radio. So from the mechanical standpoint, learning about speaking was great. I didn't really learn about communicating and motivating people until I was at Dartmouth. Not just motivating ourselves, but motivating the community. We learned how to excite people in the community with the various promotions that we did. We started one promotion called The Phrase That Pays, and at that time we changed the wording and phrasing of the rock station because I thought a rock station should have a more raggedy, jagged appearance on the logo. So we had a contemporary hit radio bumper sticker. We changed the entire logo, and it was based on, I grew up in Detroit. It was based on a station in Detroit called WLLZ, Detroit's Wheels, with flames on the wheels and really jagged lettering. And I said, that's what a rock station should be. So we changed it to 99 Rock FM and had jagged lettering. All because of Detroit. Those are some of the things that I took home from Detroit. The sense of being together, the sense of working toward a common goal, the sense of family, but it went much more than family. As you can see, we transcend generations, and all of us have had the same experience. It broke my heart to see that Dartmouth Radio had some very, very tough years in the middle, because that meant that hundreds of students did not have a chance to experience what I did and what we did. And for me, I know that had one of the greatest positive impacts on my life and on the way that I do things today. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I think for all of them, we're going to hear more from them. What I'd like to do is have comments from the audience. I think we have a microphone. We have a microphone that can be passed around. As that's getting set up, let me just insert my own short story here. In retrospect, and talking to a lot of people like these great people you see here, the station is a platform, and it's what you make of it, as is much in life, actually. And the students who've gone on, many to great careers, seized that chance and made something out of it, as Bob did, and as Charlie did, and as everybody up here did, actually. In my case, I was the administrative director of the station, which was a director position then. And there were no ratings in the market. There was no Nielsen or Arbitron or anything like that. And we were constantly being trashed by WTSL, which didn't want us to have the license in the first place. And once we did, a bunch of college kids, nobody's listened to them, and that sort of stuff. So what was the situation in the market? I mean, who were people listening to? There's just no evidence of that. So let's do a survey. And I got together, read some books. I got together a survey which involved half the station staff, at least, on the phone, going through the phone book, calling every other number. What are you listening to? A real survey. I went down to Tuck School, found a professor there, asked him, look at this. Is this legitimate? And they, yeah, that's good. You did that, and changed this little thing, got some help down there. And conducted a survey on the phone. Practically everybody in Hanover and Lebanon heard from us at some point. What are you listening to right now? What's your favorite station? And found out that, in fact, this is 1963, I guess, the Dartmouth station was the leading station in Hanover and Norwich to the north. And it was a strong number 2 to TSL in their home territory of Lebanon. and White River Junction was whatever they do, which wasn't much. That was not something that was assigned by a professor. That was not something that was taught in a course. That was not something that, it was just an opportunity, just as Charlie was talking about. And those opportunities are still there. I'm convinced of that. If you see something that interests you, that might be productive, do it. Ask about it. Go to Heath. And Heath's a very agreeable guy, as you know, and will probably help you shape it and so forth. And use the station. And that study was my first research study. And later on, I became a senior executive for a whole bunch of television networks, testing things, and heads of organizations that do this sort of stuff. That became my career. And it started there, as it started for many of these gentlemen, as something that was an opportunity to do. So, the opportunity was there. You've heard some of the stories, and I think it is there today. Now, I would like to, I can ask more questions of the panel, but I want to have plenty of time for the audience. So is there somebody who would like to ask the panel a question or maybe to elaborate on one of the things they talked about? If not, I will seize the moment, but this is your opportunity. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name's Bridget Key.
There's a mic coming there.
Oh, okay. I can talk loud. Oh, this is strange. I'm a 16 on the radio station, and well, first of all, I'm very relieved to hear that you guys put the radio station before school. I will report back to my mother immediately that this is not abnormal. But I was just wondering, in the way that everything's changing and we're coming into this really super dense information age, but at the same time, you were talking about all the tapes at Ronner that are unidentified, still in tapes, but they haven't been digitized. For students who are currently at the radio station, how can they be in contact with the greater amount of all these alums who love the radio station, who spent their best times here? Like, how, besides, bothering Matthew, can...
we are.
I guess my question is, are you guys willing to help students who are currently on the station?
Somebody want to take that?
Yeah, let me start, because actually the last time I was at the campus and saw some of my cohorts and other people from Dartmouth Broadcasting was, and I don't know, because I only was able to make it to the dinner, but a bunch of us got together for the 50th anniversary. I don't know if it was sanctioned or unsanctioned or whatever. And out of that, a number of us are friends on Facebook. And I believe the station has a presence on Facebook. But one thing we could do, and where there's a bunch of people who we could draw in, would be let's get a separate Facebook group going for Dartmouth Broadcasting then and now, or whatever you want to call it, and we can start with, and I'm sure the people I dealt with, that I'm in touch with, some of whom wanted to know why I was on a panel, and they weren't recognized as the directorate of the golden year. I think in this era of social media, for older folks like us, Facebook is probably maybe the most universal place where people are present. And I think that everybody who's had the chance to be at Dartmouth Broadcasting would want to be a resource. I think Bob Kirkpatrick from our era was or is on the board of overseers.
Yeah.
Overseers no longer.
Oh, okay, well.
He was certainly, yes.
Yeah, but, so that's my thought.
Let me add, if I could just add one point. My class has a reunion coming up, 50th, reunion in a few weeks. And I have been designated through a highly secret process as the liaison to all of the DCR jocks from my class, telling them, please come to the reunion, we'll have a great time. and we'll go up to the studios and everything. I haven't told anyone at the station this yet, but I will. So we're going to bring back AM radio to AM will rule again. So there will be in a few weeks, maybe 12 or 15 guys from my class who will be here and who still have some interest, and I would be very happy to see if we could sit down and work with Tim and George and whoever else wants to do it, and see if we can put something together.
That sounds excellent, and it's good to know that you guys will be in the station in a few weeks. Also, the Facebook group can definitely happen. That's definitely something that's doable, and it's very easy.
Hi, I'm Margaret Smith, class of '82, and I want to pick up on what you said with an idea that came from back here to have a coup. If you really want to bring your classmates in, and I'm talking now to the current management, ask if you can take over WDCR for the afternoon. Instead of having standard programming, let your colleagues actually go back to DJing. I bet they'd absolutely love it.
If I could go back to DJing and playing Bob Dylan like a Rolling Stone for 6 minutes, I would be 21 again.
That's what I would do, and I'd see if you could play it at your tent for that afternoon or whatever period of time. You'd love it. I'm assuming people on the air would love it. When we did the reunion in 1983, Bill Butel and Bob, they were on the program, and I think that we wanted Paul Gambaccini to do a show, but there was a little issue because he was employed by the BBC. So Bill Butel and Mr. Rosenfeld did a show, and they were supposed to be playing records, but they ended up reminiscing, and everyone loved it. The engineers loved it. I'm sure the people in the Upper Valley loved it, and if they didn't, they had WTSL. So I think it's everybody's dream to go back on the air. I know it's probably everybody's nightmare where you had dead air and you can't find the card or the record. I mean, I had that nightmare more than I missed the exam. But anyway, that would be my suggestion. I bet they would love it. And give me the day and I'll turn it on and listen to it online because I'd love to hear it too.
That's it.
Great.
Matt, maybe you can follow up on that for the station side?
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. They may need some retraining for how the station works now. Works a little differently nowadays, but I think that's a great idea.
Some things never change with men.
Can we come over here to Phil?
Thanks for the shout out, Tim. Tim's my classmate. I'm Phil Schaefer, 64. Media has changed a lot in the last 50 plus years. I'm wondering, in your tenures, was there ever a thought of going to television? And what happened to either to quench that or so?
There are a couple of things that I recall when our directorate was there. There's and I think it may have come on the air since, but there was an unused public television frequency available, and the college was approached about funding putting that station on the air, and there was some discussion of how Dartmouth Broadcasting might be involved, and I think the sense was that everything was so different that we kind of backed away from it. There were also some rumors that there's a television station that's now actually, I think, down on Mount Escutney, but it was on the other end of the hill where WFRD's tower was. And it was started by Nelson Crawford, who I sold ads to at Voice and Vision, and it was dark. Basically, it was on that same hill as the head end for the cable system. So he basically built the lowest power station he could that would reach the cable head end and therefore have to be on cable. And it didn't succeed, and it went dark. and then it came back on the air towards the end of our activities, and Sconix got involved with it after I had left. But I want to say it came on the air in '72 because I can remember watching Bill Idelot reading the news, and they had no cooling and they had no microwave, and so they would open the garage door on the end of the transmitter building, and Idelot never broke up on the air, and he was it's the closest I've ever seen him to breaking up on the air, and it was because the sportscaster was chasing bugs with a shoe that were drawn in by the very bright lighting for the TV in the open door.
Yeah, there were actually some documents in the 1950s, in the very earliest years of television, of Dartmouth considering whether it was going to fund a television station or not. And at the same time, UNH was setting up a public station. The decision was made by the, and they were considering the problems of the carrier current station too. So they decided not to go with television, to have a repeater for the Durham station, and not spend the enormous amount of money that a TV station would have done. And there was this local station, Charlie references, that ran for a time off and on in the 70s. It was supposedly the only NBC affiliate in black and white in the 1970s, which had some real ups and downs and more downs and more downs. I don't think it's on the air anymore. It might be a repeater for somebody else now.
I thought that it was kind of relicensed and is running
Well,
off.
there's a satellite station for WPTZ in Plattsburgh.
Yeah, that's right.
All right.
And
That's
satellite,
right.
and they still have a bureau down there in White River. But for a while, it had some of its own independent programming. I was always amazed. I just assumed that this would evolve into a college television station. I've always been surprised that it didn't. But now I think time's kind of passed it by because it's all on the web. But you can do the same thing visually on the web without a lot of technical setup, probably.
Other questions or things we'd like to follow up on with the panel here?
Well, I'd actually just briefly like to plug the panels coming later today, because that's a good segue into that, because we'll be talking about the future of media, where that's going today, how the internet plays a new role, where radio might be evolving, like what the current state of media is, what's popular. So if you want to check that out, which I think will be interesting, that'll be later today in 53 Commons. And if you don't know where 53 Commons is, we have a map at the radio station.
Yes, sir. The mic.
Bob Sauer, 66. First of all, I'd like to corroborate Al Ryan because his golden years were the golden years, clearly. There was a lot of competition between the college newspaper and the radio stations. Is there anybody here from the newspaper? Good, then I can speak openly.
Yeah, go ahead.
The Dartmouth has a non-compete clause, so if you're going to be a sports writer for the Dartmouth, they will not let you be a sports broadcaster for Dartmouth. I used to fight with editors about that.
Oh, that was,
They have a no-compete clause with us.
we didn't need no compete clauses. So nobody would even consider being on both. Each was below the other's plane.
Third floor, second floor, Robinson Hall. There's a clear
Yeah.
hierarchy.
In any case, there was a lot of competition between the two. We knew the newspaper as the Daily D, as I think probably everybody did on campus, except for the people who were on the newspaper who called it the Dartmouth. And it seems to me that while we were at the radio station, first of all, there was a bit of a war of words that started up. Something like reading on the air promos for the radio station. When you read it, it's history. When you hear it, you know it's news. And that got perverted a little bit by the newspaper too. When you hear it, it's rumor. When you read it, you know it's true. And then I'd say, sunk a little bit. In fact, maybe along the lines of the political campaigns now, to remember, you can't wrap your garbage in our news. And after that, it sort of faded away. But Al, am I right in remembering that we had some either touch football or softball games between the two organizations during those years?
I was working in Robinson Hall, Bob. I don't remember that. We did, yes.
The thing that really sticks in my mind from that time is we came up with a cheer for our, I can't remember if it was softball or touch football team. Play along with me now. Give me a W.
Give me a W.
Give me a D.
D.
Give me a C.
C.
Give me an R.
R.
What do you got? Whitaker. Was that your invention?
No, I stopped with the Jolly Green Giant.
I do remember that one clearly.
Learned your lesson, huh?
Yeah. There were a lot of good on-air things that went on too, but that's probably better saved for after the formal presentations. Thank you. And Tim, thank you very much. And I hope you'll find a way to make those slides public. They're a really good outline of what the station went through.
Sure. Could I ask the panel maybe to comment on interaction of the station with other groups on campus? In other words, we've talked about the station almost as if it's this insular thing, but a lot of other groups. In the early years, it was the players, and in later years, some of the political groups and the interest groups, had shows on the station or contributed to political debates or that kind of thing. During your era, what kind of involvement, if any, was there with other groups on campus? Anybody?
I honestly don't recall any significant interaction. I mean, aside from the softball game or whatever now and then. I mean, we really considered ourselves the best, the most accomplished, the elite student organization on campus. I mean, we did. And I suspect it was not only 66 that felt that. And, we tried to be modest about it, and we tried not to look down too much on all the other student organizations and feel too sorry for them or anything like that. But I just don't recall that we had any actual interaction with them. And part of it was because, unlike almost any other organization on campus, you couldn't just walk away for a few hours and lock the door and come back later. I mean, we were on the air 7 days a week. 18 or 20 hours a day. We had to be there, we had to do it, and it just didn't leave a lot of time for anything else.
I don't remember other student organizations particularly, but I do remember that any musicians that got invited to play for any group at Dartmouth, we tried to interview them. So the Bangles, Steve Winwood, whenever they came, whoever invited them, we were involved with at least setting up an interview or bringing them into the station and so on. So we did enjoy that. I do remember a few instances of us going outside the college, though. We did visit University of Connecticut. We visited their radio program. We took a road trip down to WBCN in Boston just to bring our staff down and see how they ran things. Surprisingly, we thought we did it better than they did.
There's a show that's on today called Homebrew. I believe that's the name of it now, right? Which is live performances of bands from the area. They bring them in and do live remotes and talk about their music. And it's a way, it's not pre-recorded, actually, obviously. It's much closer to the young artists and young bands mostly that are just starting out.
Tim,
So
one thing we should mention here is a shout out to John Catlett, who was the president, I think, John, of the Ivy Network, which was the 8 student radio stations. John graduated from Princeton and then came up here in, I think, 64 to go to the Tuck School, and we gave him membership in DCR as part of our affirmative action program for underprivileged radio stations in New Jersey. But John was the president of the Ivy Network, and I think it was my senior year, it was our turn to host the annual banquet for all of the other IB stations. So we had a very nice dinner, I think, out on Knockham Pond in one of the cabins. And sitting down and talking to our counterparts from the other Ivies, I think probably we had more in common and more interaction with them than we did with most other student organizations here. Just the one thing I remember particularly about that Ivy banquet, since we were the hosts, we had to come up with a speaker, someone with a little bit of star quality from the media. So somehow we invited what was called the radio television critic for Newsweek magazine, who agreed to come up and speak to us. His name was Peter Benchley. And he was writing for Newsweek, and we were very happy to have him. And at one point, he said he was working on a book about a shark that terrorized people on Martha's Vineyard. And we sort of said, well, good luck with that, but don't. Newsweek is a pretty good gig, so don't, be careful.
I think that in the 70s, when I was there, well, the station was totally student-run. The focus of the programming had changed to the Upper Valley and Dartmouth, as opposed to being a Dartmouth station heard in the Upper Valley. And I think to most of us, there were no relevant student organizations other than ours, so.
Yeah, during the 60s and 70s in particular, and into the 80s, there was a lot of turmoil on campus then. Some of you may not know this, but shanties and occupations and all the stuff that went on in those years. And there were young Republicans, young Democrats, women's groups, ethnic groups, that all had a cause and a reason, and many of them were more than happy to have a platform to broadcast, and there might be a debate show between them or something like that. The station was always absolutely neutral on causes. Got into some trouble during the Vietnam War on that because it wouldn't take sides, but it would give voice to both sides. So Dartmouth is rich in organizations of various types, and the radio station can be a platform for those groups. And I think it's open today to that, from what I can tell, especially on the web DCR side. Sir.
I'm Jim Rosenfield, 52. And when I got up here, in the very first week that I was here, I was approached by a fellow by the name of Bob Sisk, who was the general manager of the station. And I was pre-med at the time. And by the time I left, I was no longer pre-med, but pre-broadcasting, because my entire career was changed based on what happened here. The two comments I was going to make were that at that time, it was very important that you not have a Boston accent. And so I spent wasted a lot of my academic credits on speech classes so that I could get rid of my Boston accent, which later on turned out to be very helpful, because I am one of the guys, the culprits that actually put WTSL on the air. I was auditioned over the telephone and offered a job by phone to put this station on the air with a young man by the name of John Gambling. Now that's John A. Gambling, son of John B. Gambling, and the John Gambling III is on the air today in New York and in Miami. And the two of us drove to an empty lot on the Leb Road, and on that lot was a box. It was the size of, about 6 feet by 6 feet, and there was a tower coming out of that box, but there was nothing else. And we stood around for about an hour, and all of a sudden, a truck pulled up into the lot with a trailer house in the back of it, and a guy got out of the truck and plugged the box into the trailer house, and we were on the air. And that's how WTSL got started. Now, I was a little bit hurt that Rhodes Record Rack didn't make the cut for the special broadcasts that were on at that time, but at that time, That was the broadcast I did. Rosenfield was a little too ethnic at that time, so it was Rhodes Record Rack. I did Rhodes Record Rack both on WTSL and WDBS. But thank you so much for what you've been doing. I think this is wonderful.
We'll hear from Jim tonight. He's going to be our featured speaker at the banquet tonight. I'm sorry. Yes.
Thanks. I'm John Catlett, and I was already mentioned as being here only a couple of years when I was at the Tuck School, but that was the time when I was not really running the Ivy Network. Ivy Network was pretty much always run by Yale undergraduates who were attracted by the opportunity to make sales commissions by selling ads on all the Ivy League stations. And I have to admit that one of the reasons I came to Tuck, as opposed to Harvard Business School, which I also applied to, was that we had a great radio station up here, and Harvard had a radio station run by a bunch of guys who just I wouldn't want to work with, I thought. And I also wanted to mention that one of the only programming things the Ivy Network ever did was in the fall of 1964, when I was in my first year at Tuck, and we had the election between Goldwater and
LBJ.
Right. And we arranged, with the help of these guys from Yale who ran the Ivy Network sales operation, we arranged to do a broadcast of the election returns. We got a studio in Radio City Music Hall, New York, for use for just that night, and brought students from all of the Ivy Network stations to New York to do a report of competing with all the big radio and television networks. And I have to say that even though I remember that there were students from all these stations, the ones that we brought from WDCR were really the outstanding stars of the evening. And I remember particularly that we had a guy named Robert Reich, who is still heard on national radio as one of our reporters. Another was Jeff Pannett. Another was Bob Booms, who had a deep, booming voice. And that broadcast was carried not just by the Ivy League stations, but we had a lineup of college stations coast to coast that tied into the broadcast. Our advertiser was Western Union, and they paid for the landlines that put us all together. So we had about 38 stations, I think it was, and it was a terrific experience. But the people who really ran the broadcast, and another one was, I think, Owen Leach, who was quite a bit involved in that broadcast. Great fun, as I recall. Thanks a lot.
I had a quick story about, well, we're talking about other student radio stations. When I was doing the football broadcast here, my counterpart at Penn, the Penn College station, was Maury Povich, the guy who's now the Sleaze talk show host. But more important, married to Connie Chung, who worked for us and has been a lifelong friend. But Maury would do the Penn games, and when Dartmouth played Penn, we always interviewed each other at halftime on our respective stations. And Maury's been a friend all my life, too.
So I did spend 6 months repping the Ivy Network. And at the time that I was dealing from WDCR, we had a couple of placements from the Ivy Network. We had the Exxon commercials that were not always well received on campus. But at the time, and I think in the 50s, Dartmouth Broadcasting was allowed to accept cigarette ads, but at some point, at the time I was there, we didn't accept either cigarette or alcohol ads. And somehow, and I can't remember why, and it wasn't my primary doing, but we got the ability to take beer advertising. And but in dealing with the Yale had an unusual situation that they had a commercial FM station that nobody had wanted when they first built it. And now as FM was coming up, they had the FM station. and I got my hands on the Pulse rating book, and they were 19th in a 15-station market, except on Saturday afternoons. And they were #1 in the market, and I called them and I said, whatever you're doing Saturday afternoon, do it all the time. And they said, oh, that's Yale football, and we're not going to do it anymore because it doesn't fit our view of what we should do.
Any, so did you want to say something?
I'm Mike Hobbs, 62, and the comment about comparing with other stations and the obverse of that, I think the significance of the Dartmouth stations, the entirely student-operated, et cetera, et cetera. The Dartmouth station, WDCR then, was that was the authentic animal. I mean, this was not a campus club or something that if you screwed up, then okay, then you go on to the next class or whatever. If the students and management of WDCR made a mess of it, the entire enterprise was jeopardized. And I don't know that there were many, if any, other quote-unquote college radio stations at the time, or probably for many years since, if ever, that had that scope of ultimate final responsibility for the planning, the management, the execution, and ultimately the survival of the enterprise. And I think that that's a common thread in what many of the panelists have talked about. And going back, Tim, to your original slide, even though there may be only 10% of the Dartmouth Broadcasting alums who went into radio, and another 10%, like myself and a few others, who went into other media, television in my case. But 80% did something else. But I think the success quotient probably of the 80%, along with the 10 and the 10, drew a lot on the experience of being a participant in planning and executing a complex social and public serving in one way or another enterprise, and being responsible for the end result, which was something that certainly carrier current radio stations at Harvard or elsewhere didn't have the advantage of that kind of opportunity.
Yeah, I'll insert briefly. I mentioned that Ernest Martin Hopkins didn't trust the students and had very tight control, haven't been burned once. He left in 1945, and John Sloan Dickey became president from 1945 until 1970, 25 years. And President Dickey was a big supporter of independence. He believed that young people, young men then, but young people gained responsibility when they had responsibility, including the opportunity to fail and recover from that. Now, he's dealing with a federally licensed station, which could reflect badly on the university and the college, so he had to be careful about that. But he did he changed. He dissolved the Radio Council in 1947 and basically turned it over to the students with a very light hand. President Kemeny, who succeeded him from 1970 to 1980 or 81, felt the same way. So it was kind of built into the DNA of the station that this is the student station. Let them run it. Don't tell them what to do. A lot of other colleges and universities don't do that. They have much more oversight and much more either faculty or administration control. And times change, and things have to be different now than they were, unfortunately, in the golden years. But I think that's been a thread, I think you're right, of Dartmouth Radio for a long time, and I'd give great credit to those two presidents for sort of planting that seed back in the early days. Yes?
I might just point out, thank you. I might just point out that I guess it was during my senior year here, which was 1951. I had a woman here as my invited guest for Green Key Weekend, who has been my wife for more than 60 years at this point. And just as an example of the fact that we could do things as we felt we wanted to on the station, she came up to the station with me. I had a morning broadcast several days a week, open the station. And as we were sitting there on Friday or Saturday of Green Key Weekend, the two of us did the New York Times crossword puzzle on air. And I don't know if anyone else has done that since, but it was an experience that we enjoyed and still talk about.
We just have about 5 minutes left. Yes, well, right down here first. You haven't spoken. Chris down here.
Thanks, Matt. So I'm Chris Karsten, 79, and I was the very first program director of WFRD, which was actually in year 2 of the station, because in year 1, there was a single program director for both WDCR and WFRD, and we very quickly figured out it was not possible for a human being to actually do that job, so we split the job the next year. But I was there for the inaugural broadcast of WFRD, which was a gala 1-hour show from the Hopkins Center that featured the Airs and the Barbary Coast, and speeches by President Kemeny and by Alman Ives, who some of you will remember from, because he goes all the way back to the very beginning of Dartmouth Radio WDBS. But there are two things that I remember in particular from that night. The first is the broadcast went off very well. Richard Mark, the incoming GM, finished up his role as the MC, and then got ready to throw it over to Rick, back to the station for Rick Beyer to read the 9 o'clock news. But the next voice that people heard was not Rick's. It was a heavy metal band singing "We Are Crazy," which was the tech department taking over and commenting on the series of all-nighters that they had made prior to the broadcast to get the setup done in time for that evening. The other thing I remember is afterward, the broadcast had gone very well. We all went over to the Inn Bar to celebrate. Maura Harway, who is now married to Richard, was the producer of the broadcast that night. And as we were sitting there celebrating, she managed to spill wine on herself. And what I'm getting to here is why, if there's any controversy about what time of year it was, the inaugural broadcast was in February in Dartmouth. So Maura got up from the table, always resourceful, went off to the ladies' room, actually took her dress off, washed it out, came back and sat down. We all finished our drinks, and then went back over to the radio station to get for Maura to get her coat. And her dress froze on the way over from the Inn Bar to Robinson Hall. So two memories to help celebrate the 40th anniversary of WFRD and going on the air.
Hi, I'm Dave Marston, 74. You'll hear more from me later. I wanted to get some recognition in for the Robinson family for giving us Robinson Hall and designating it as a protected enclave for student organizations, something that I see as being threatened now with administrators moving into more and more offices there. But I've said this to many of you in the past, I'll say it again, without that protected enclave, the student organizations could not win the square footage wars that are so vicious at this college, and Dartmouth would not be a first-rate college if it weren't for that gift of Robinson Hall about 100 years ago. And it's very important to us.
A lot of people don't realize it's not named after Robin Robinson. It's named after some other Robinson a long time ago who believed in student organizations.
I can leave everybody with one little bit of imagery. There's no feeling quite like this, and those of you who have been at the station early in the morning will identify with this. Imagine middle of December or January, icy winter morning, snowing, foot of snow on the ground. It's dark out, come into the station at about 5:30 in the morning. turn on the first light in the studio. First thing you do is turn on the de-icer on the antenna. Wait for 15, 20, maybe 30 minutes if it's really cold out. Throw the switch on the transmitter and wait to see that light turn on. When it turns on, you know you're live. No feeling like it.
All right, I think we've worn out our panel probably enough
I
by
just have
now.
one little observation.
Sure.
It's just so nice to be in a hall full of fellow radio geeks. So the minute your mic began to feed back, you knew right away, gotta cut the mic. I'm always the only one in the whole audience that knows what's going on.
Round of applause for our panel, please.